Looking ahead to 2025, I think it is very interesting and also very rare that the team that won the Drivers' Championship last year, and also the team that, if they had someone like a Carlos Sainz racing alongside Max, probably would have also won the Constructors' Championship as well, is not seen as the favourite or even the second favourite for the Constructors' Championship. The prevailing narrative from the media and also the fans is that, given the momentum that both McLaren and also Ferrari had at the end of last year, they are by far being favoured over a team like Red Bull, despite the fact that in the last 4 races, Max was still able to win 2 of them. And now, the Constructors title is almost a different conversation because I kind of understand the skepticism around that a little bit more. It definitely feels like McLaren and Ferrari have the 2 best driver lineups, which is going to help them in the Constructors, whilst when it comes to Mercedes and Red Bull, they're kind of on an island by themselves in terms of having a very clear number 1 and also a clear number 2. Having said that, before we've even seen a single car on the track actually do a representative lap time, it definitely feels like the hype of Lewis going to Ferrari and all of the hope and expectation around that team, and also the fact that McLaren ended the previous season really well, it feels like that hype is almost beginning to cause Red Bull to become underestimated. This is still the team that has dominated the ground effect era, and even after Adrian Newey left, despite the fact that they definitely struggled during the mid part of last season, they were still able to outdevelop themselves out of a hole. And again, when you look at how competitive Max was in that Red Bull, which is the most important thing for that team because he is the one that drives the team, not just in terms of performances, but in terms of the team dynamic. When Max is on a high, so is the rest of the team, and it just feels like they are definitely being a little bit underestimated. I think we're all expecting for 2025 to be a much more open championship because we're going into the final year of these regulations. Teams at some point are going to have to stop developing, and certain teams, depending on where they are in the title fight, are perhaps going to choose to stop their development for this season a little bit sooner, and some might push all the way till the end of the season. However, during a close championship, there is always more emphasis on strategy and also driver execution. That is 2 things that Red Bull, regardless of how fast their car has been, have always excelled at. Max Verstappen's race execution last year, I think, was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, there were so many races where, even if the McLaren was perhaps a little bit quicker, Verstappen's experience, his race execution in both qualifying and then of course in the Grand Prix as well, and also on the operational side of the team in terms of their strategy, their pit stops, they definitely outfoxed McLaren on more than one occasion, and they still go into 2025 as operationally the benchmark on the grid. I definitely feel that the Verstappen factor is being underappreciated and that as a driver he is being underrated at the moment. Verstappen is still clearly the best driver on the grid and has been over the past couple of years, just in the way that he's executed even when he hasn't had the fastest car. He made such a difference in so many races last year, and it's going to be very interesting to see if he'll be able to make the same difference in 2025. That experience gap, not in terms of race starts obviously, but fighting for championships, is actually closing with Lando, a lot more experienced now that he's fought for a world title. Lewis, of course, is a 7-time world champion and has plenty of experience, and even Leclerc had a little bit of a taste for it in 2022. As far as Piastri, we are still yet to see exactly where his pace is going to be relative to the front runners, but Max is going to continue being the best driver on the grid, and car performance and car characteristics are going to make a massive difference in terms of how fast he's going to be at the beginning of the season. The car characteristics is something that Red Bull have really keyed on in 2025. Christian Horner during the F1 75 launch event even said so, saying the team has worked very hard over the winter to work on some of the vices of the RB20. Going back to last year, although every single person wants a faster car, it was more so the car handling dynamics that changed during the mid-portion of the season when Red Bull saw their biggest slump. If we remember, Max's worst race was probably in Baku last season, where he still finished 5th just purely out of staying out of trouble and just doing the best job that he could. That was Max Verstappen at his absolute worst, when he was the least comfortable with the car, and even if the Red Bull is not outright quicker than the McLaren or the Ferrari, as long as they can key on those characteristics and can make Max comfortable in the car, he will turn the second or maybe even third fastest car on the grid into a title contender. Max's leadership is definitely going to be tested because there is going to be more competition on track, which is going to put more pressure on the entire team as well as him, and there is also going to be more distractions off the track as well. He is going to be chased by the likes of Mercedes and Aston Martin all season long, and how these teams compare in terms of competitiveness in 25 is also going to have a massive play in that narrative. If we go back to last year, the moment that Red Bull started to struggle, that is when the Mercedes rumors started to really ramp up. We know that Toto is really going to want to get Max for 26, and we know that Aston Martin and Lawrence Stroll are basically going to throw the entire kitchen sink as well as all of the money that they have in trying to sign him. How that is going to affect Max and how that's going to affect his title challenge is going to be very interesting. It's going to test him mentally because those distractions can have an effect on how you drive, and how he balances what he wants to do with his future with fighting for the title is going to be one of his biggest mental challenges this season. Or when it comes to the question of dealing with pressure and the drivers who are going to be under the most pressure in 25, Liam Lawson is right up there. With only 11 races under his belt, he is being thrown into a championship and race-winning team that's kind of in decline. That in itself is a very unique challenge that only really the experienced drivers usually have to deal with. How he deals with the pressure in the car going up against Max Verstappen and having that comparison every single race, and also the pressure from the media as well, that is what's going to define whether he is a success or failure at Red Bull. Last season, in the races that he competed in, he really tried to be a combative and antagonistic driver and show a fighting spirit. He went toe-to-toe and frustrated the likes of Fernando Alonso and then more publicly Sergio Perez. That felt a lot more personal because we all know that he was going for his seat. He was almost trying to embarrass Sergio Perez in front of Red Bull, and I guess in some kind of way it worked. Red Bull saw something in Lawson that made them think that he has the mentality to be a Red Bull driver even with just 11 Grand Prix under his belt. And in a way, he's also kind of the most inexperienced driver we have seen over the past couple of years, in the sense that he has tested a lot of Red Bull and Racing Bull machinery, meaning they have all the data they need on him already. And given that he's going to have his first proper full preseason with finally his own team and his own people around him, hopefully that's going to make the difference, which means that at the beginning of the season, he is going to hit the ground running. Christian Horner actually gave a little bit of insight into what the expectations are from Red Bull towards Liam. Liam's job is quite clear. He is there to provide as much support as he possibly can. There is not an expectation for him to go out and beat a 4-time world champion. If he beats him, then fantastic, and there's no order to say he can't. But it's a matter of trying to take the pressure off Liam as best we can. I think Red Bull are definitely going with a much more different approach to the beginning of Lawson's time at Red Bull compared to Checo's. Checo at the beginning of 21, 22 and even 23 spent far too much mental energy on trying to beat Max, and in a way it kind of started to backfire, especially once he started to struggle. Liam is going to have to be a lot more pragmatic in terms of his mental approach compared to Max, always focusing on himself and not what Max is going to be doing, because if they can establish a good number 1 and number 2 dynamic, it could actually be an advantage over McLaren and Ferrari. If the season is close, and we have seen this in the past with seasons like 2007 and 2008, there is a very real situation where the McLaren and Ferrari drivers are actually taking points away from each other. If Red Bull can be competitive enough to allow Max to win races and be an outsider for the championship, then they can establish a very strong and very cooperative number 1 and number 2 dynamic much earlier in the season compared to Ferrari and McLaren, which is only going to take more pressure off Max and actually give him a bit of an advantage compared to those teams. The last thing that's going to be absolutely key to the competitiveness of that team, not just for 2025 but also for 2026, is Christian Horner taking control of that team and controlling the tension that started to flare up at the beginning of last year. And now, in terms of the Red Bull battle, it does seem that Horner has seemingly come out on top in the never-ending fight between him, Jos Verstappen, Marco, the Austrian side, and the Thai side. I think Jos Verstappen is going to be a lot more in the background, although he is a very key member of Team Verstappen, and I'm sure that's going to flare up at some point with some random comments towards Horner. But it's going to be Horner's job to make sure that, despite all of the instability over not just the past year, but the past couple of years, with Rob Marshall leaving the team, Will Courtney leaving the team, Jonathan Wheatley, and then of course Adrian Newey, it's his job to stabilize the team from within and empower the development team from within as well, to make sure that they are on top of 2025 development, and also when they switch to the more important 2026 development. Given that Red Bull actually have a really good track record of that transition period between the last year of a long regulation period and the first year of a brand new regulation period, let's not forget that in 21 and 22 they managed it absolutely perfectly, and they were actually one of the teams in 21 that pushed basically all the way till the end of the season, given how important it was for Max to win that first championship for Red Bull. I have absolutely no worries that on the aero side, they are going to be very competitive next season. However, the added complication, which is a massive complication by the way, of building their own power unit for 2026, that is going to be the biggest challenge, not of just this season and of next, but I also think that it's going to play a key role in if they can keep Max Verstappen. There is no doubt that Red Bull is going to be juggling a lot of balls in 25, and definitely more than in previous seasons. It is a privilege to have a dominant car because the success that brings being spearheaded by Max, it can cover for a lot of cracks within the team. Having said that, despite all of the difficulties and all of the challenges that Red Bull are going to face, they still have the best driver on the grid, they still have the best team on the operational side, they still have a phenomenal amount of people working there that created a race-winning car towards the end of last year, and they have nailed the transition period between regulations before in the past. You just can't discount, despite all of the hype around McLaren and Ferrari, what Red Bull will be capable of in 2025, and you can never underestimate what Max Verstappen is able to do basically in any car that he drives. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, that would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.